It's a pleasure today to divide with you a sort of preview of what will be an exhibition next November in Florence in collaboration with Claudia Lena Riobst and Rita Balleri. My talk today will be divided, let's say, in three parts. First, a quick part on the collection in the Palazzo Pitti of Oriental porcelain made by the Grand Dukes, and for that I'd love to thank Francesco Morena, who helped me in the news that I collected, and Marco Spallanzani and William Kwiatkowski for helping me in the translation of Turkish Arabic inscriptions in some of the Ginori documents, which I will show you on the second part of the lecture, which includes, in fact, the iconographical references of the early Ginori production and its trade with Constantinople, which is, I would like to say, quite new, thanks to some documents which I had the opportunity to find in the Ginori archives. So, starting from the Palazzo Pitti Oriental collection, which you mostly know, we start from the very early piece, which is actually a Lonquan Celadon bowl, part of 9, which were part of an important gift brought in 1487 by the Egyptian Sultan Qaitbay, as suggested by the rear inscription. And on the right, you can see the beautiful vase, which is similar to the one dated 1327 today in the Percival David collection. The second part of the slide shows you the beautiful example of early blue and white porcelain, the earliest example in the Medici collection, and in Morena thinks it belonged to the 400 pieces of Chinese porcelain listed in Cosimo I's inventory. Its preciousness was considered through the centuries in the Grand Ducal collection till the end of the 18th century. As you can see, the vase, in particular of a painting by Antonio Ciocci, made in 1785, and as a model for a pietra dura table, which is part of 2 still today in the Palazzo Pitti collection. You can see, just to give you a preview of what we are going to talk in a while, the importance of the vase, which was known through the centuries, with some pieces of Ginori porcelain of the third quarter of the 18th century. Now, going on to one of the personages, which is going to be a main point of reference for Carlo Ginori, we see here a small plaque kept in the Bargello of Medici porcelain, which portrays Francesco I. He was also very interested in the acquisition of Oriental porcelain, which he bought in Cadix or already on the Egyptian market. But he's well remembered actually for his alchemic interest in and for the conception of the wonderful Kunstkammer called the Studiolo, and then later in 1587 of the Tribuna degli Uffizi, the sort of how can I say, a public Kunstkammer. But also, he's well known for the construction with the Architetto Bernardo Buontalenti near the gardens of San Marco of the very famous casino, which in 1588 became the seat of the Opificio delle Pietre Dure. The best result, though, was the production of the so-called Medici porcelain. You can see here an example from the Faenza Porcelain Museum, and the mark is not of the same plate, but it's worthwhile showing it to you because it will be the point of departure, really, the use of this blue mark of Florence dome by Carlo Ginori. The lower part is part of a basin with the representation of St. Mark today in the Museum of the Bargello. The importance of this production was enormous, and in fact, we can find listed in a register of the Casino di San Marco, and I thank Francesco Moreno for this news, about 98 pieces of Oriental porcelain and 538 pieces of Medici porcelain. Now, the collection of Orientalia was augmented by Ferdinand I, whose passion for mirabilia was especially remembered, apart from the porcelain, for the acquisition of the most important part of the Nautilus shell and other naturalia, which some objects were even listed in the Tribune inventory. Here you can see on your right-hand side a beautiful Nautilus shell mounted by François Crèvecoeur, last quarter of the 16th century, still today in the now called Tesoro dei Granduchi, once Silver Porcelain Museum. But let's say the turning point for our talk of today is actually the Grand Duke Cosimo III, who here is portrayed in the, let's say, last part of his life by Van Duveen in a portrait of 1700, and his great interest for porcelain, especially Oriental blue and white, but not only. He also acquired Dehuat. He acquired, according to Francesco Morena, lacquer and even Japanese porcelain. Here I just wanted to point out, since his taste was rather wide, that he had received, having opened a Siberian so-called route to China, and having had a great contact with Peter the Great, he had received this beautiful silk tapestry woven with silver and gold. And then he even continued his collection of mirabilia and naturalia. And here you have a rhinoceros cap made in China and engraved in China, but mounted in Florence, today part still of the Grand Ducal collection, as well as a small blue and white Chinese porcelain cup, which was used for chocolate. And as you all know, chocolate was first introduced in Italy through Florence, and it was highly appreciated at the Medici court. They even produced a very, how can I say, a special kind of chocolate using jasmine, which was actually introduced through Goa. It was really a part of the Medici collection, where they had also a wonderful garden. And all of this is part a little bit of what I would call the interest in exotica, in science, and in preciousness, which was actually in Florence at the time of the last Medici. As you know, Cosimo's son, who was the great Prince Ferdinand, pre-died to him in 1713. So this was for Florence a great disgrace. Ferdinand, in contrary to Cosimo, who was pious and religion, actually really a little bit obsessed by religion. And in fact, the first Meissen piece, which I'm not showing today, but you probably know, the first Meissen piece which entered the Pitti collection was a Böttger crucifixion dated 1719, and it's the only one which actually has been ascribed to Cosimo. Here you have Ferdinando, who was also called l'Orfeo dei Principi, because he was a passionate collector, not only of Dutch paintings, but of porcelain. And he was a musician himself. He was highly beloved, and here is a portrait of him by Gabbiani, dating 1687, showing him among other musicians and his Moorish serf. On the right-hand side, you have two Dehuat lions, part of his collection, and still today in the Palazzo Pitti. These, I show them, they are totally white, but what is interesting to see, that we shall see now, for instance, in the collection of Oh, well, this is just very interesting. I was going to talk of the collection of the Electress Palatine, but I thought it was fun to show you how wide was the interest in Florence for all what was exotical and strange, and also from the end of the 17th century, according to Francesco Morena's researches, there were, and also to later paintings, there was a high interest in red ware, either of I Ching, which was collected in the Pitti Palace, but none of it is left, but we know it through the inventories, and also from what was called Terra de Boqueira, which is actually Mexican ceramics, and the so-called bucchero, which here is also a similar one to the one in Palazzo Pitti, is painted by Cristoforo Munari in a painting of his of 1707 in the Galleria Nazionale di Parma. But we know that Munari has been active 10 years nearly at the Medici court, and he was in the circle of Ferdinando, Gran Principe Ferdinando. So what he portrays here is actually how the display was, apart from the lemons, which were considered rather precious. This, you can even read from the inventories, red ware displayed with blue and white. And it is exactly as we also read about the collection of the Electress Palatine. What I forgot to tell you is that in 1690, Cosimo opened sort of cabinet, the porcelain, but in the Galleria Corridoio degli Uffizi, because until that date, the porcelain was kept in Palazzo Vecchio, but it was more as a depot. He actually was the first, that was the Electress father, he was the first to have a display as a precious cabinet to honor, in a certain way, to give a sacrality to what was the porcelain collection. This way of thinking was highly appreciated by the Electress Palatine, who was his daughter. She married in 1690 the Elector Palatine, Karl Wilhelm von der Pfalz, and went to live in Düsseldorf. Also through the, how can I say, the being proximate to Amsterdam, she had a way to build a sort of real ceramic path with Holland as well as with Portugal, and this decided to bring her porcelain first to the Bensberg Castle. And when she left Düsseldorf in 1717, after her beloved husband's death, she came back to Palazzo Pitti with all her porcelain and belongings. Now, what it's interesting to see that she started to build a cabinet in the Palazzo Pitti around 1720, and this cabinet was unfortunately dismantled in 1771 after the great sale of all the Medici porcelain collection, apart from the objects which she saved with the famous patto di famiglia that she signed, saving for Florence, I'm sorry about the English, but bequeathing to Florence the objects of the official state collection, not the ones of her private collection. Now, the inventories have been rather interesting to give us a way to understand how this collection was formed, because everything what was porcelain had been sold or given by her to her ladies in waiting, among which also some Meissen porcelain, because the Electress Palatine came back in 1717. She lived after her brother, the last Grand Duke Gian Gastone, that you will see here, and she was the last Medici who died in Florence in 1743, but already being without a rule, because in 1737 the last Medician Grand Duke, Gian Gastone, died, and through a dynastic, how can I say, upheaval, Tuscany passed to the Lorraine, to the Habsburg Lorraine, and Francis Stephen, husband of Maria Theresa of Austria, became Grand Duke of Tuscany. Now, the private collection of the Grand Duke Gian Gastone was saved by the Electress, and in his inventory there are different Meissen porcelain as well as Japanese and Chinese porcelain. What we reckon today are some pieces which survived and went into the Lorenese inventory. Gian Gastone was absolutely debauché as a person, but he was a great collector, and his collection was extremely refined and absolutely influenced by his sister-in-law, Anna Sibylla of Baden, who was herself very near to Augustus the Strong. And in fact, the tortoises that you can see on the right-hand side, probably modeled by Fritzsche, you can see two others also in the collection in Schloss Favorite near Baden-Baden. Now, when Carlo Ginori, and we start the second part of the lecture, in 1737 started his manufactory after having been in Vienna to homage the new sovereigns. That was more or less the situation that he found in the collections, not only in the Pitti, but also the most preeminent Florentine families collected, obviously, Chinese and Japanese porcelain. Most of it was blue and white. It was absolutely necessary for an important family near to the court in Florence to have a blue and white service. You can see here the one that the Ginori received at the end of the 17th century with their coat of arms, and which enormously influenced the early production of Doccia. On the right-hand side, you can see a portrait of Ginori, actually a sculpture made by Gaspero Bruschi at the end of the life. There are about 3 known, and one is in the Doccia Museum. At the center, I just put this painting, which is more or less contemporary and gives you an idea what was important to be compared and collected with porcelain. And actually, porcelain was still in that moment not so much an object of use, but still an alchemic, precious and rare object, which was still part of Kunstkammer. And who could have, and as you all know, who could have had a factory would have been a person of wealth and of great power. And Ginori, after having been in Vienna, comes, and I'm not going on today on the Austrian influence, but however, it's good to be remembered that the manufacture started in Florence in 1737 thanks to 2 artists, one being Karl Wendelin and Reiter, who came down to Florence with his family, and he was a house maler and especially active for the Dupaquier factory, and the other one, Giorgio delle Dori. But the document here, still dated 37, written by Baron Fürchner to Ginori, encourages him. And in fact, the most important sentence, I don't know how this works, but however, is where Fürchner writes, "You will realize this with great courage and good materials and earth, but especially you will do a great service to the state." Now, the state not being the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, but being Austria. And in fact, it is how he got the privilege 5 years later, because there was the siege in Vienna where the Dupaquier porcelain was done, but at that moment, no other official, I say official because there were experiments going on in Italy, manufacturing of porcelain was in Italy, and Doccia would have been, let's say, the long hand of the enterprises. how can I say, sustained by Maria Theresia. And in fact, the porcelain would go to Vienna via Trieste, which was part of the Austrian Empire as well. Now, here you can see a very interesting piece on your left-hand side is the only and earliest Doccia quanin, the only one known, being about 40 centimeters. But what is interesting is that you can compare it with some Chinese dehua figures, which were collected and in fact listed in the inventories of Electress Palatine, according to Francesco Morena. And if you see the one on the right hand, which is described in the inventories like the Holy Virgin holding a child, they arrived white, and Francesco writes that they were painted in gold in Florence after 1720. He gives actually a precise date, 1721 circa. This, I don't know exactly why that date, but certainly it is true that there was a laboratory of painting in gold on Chinese porcelain, and the experiments were done also, obviously, in early Doccia. The figure belonged to the Gerini collection, and who had a very important collection, and they were important commissioners to the Doccia manufacturing. Now here, just for fun, I put this painting, which is in the Pitti today, belonging to Giovanna Garzoni, and it portrays around 1650, 1648, and this is what they say the date. I thought it would have been a little bit later, actually, because of the dehua, and it portrays the favorite dog of Granduchessa Vittoria, and on the right hand you have a small dehua cup. Now, the first production of Ginori, although his aim would have been to do blue and white, we shall see that the first production of the first 5 years and up on, as in the inventories, I have here a list of the 1742-43 inventories, most of it is a basso rilievo, or vasi olandesi and vasi da camino, and these ones that you can see also from the Gerini collection were at the first time assigned to Vezzi, which had a lot of similarities, in fact, with the early Doccia productions, and they have many times been mixed one with the other. These are about 40 centimeters, 35, 40 centimeters high, and they have also been produced without this wide neck. They are very interesting because they give an idea of the very early production at Doccia, which had also continued up to the 48 like that, and with shapes which were not Chinese but taken from the silverware. Now here just an example for, in my opinion, looks to Chinese dehua, not only because Doccia always had a very, how can I say, intense and diversified background. And here on your left-hand side, I just put this perfume burner of dehua porcelain in the Porzellansammlung in Dresden. And on the right-hand side, you have one of the most beautiful objects. A pity we can't have it in the exhibition, but it's a Coffeepot double wall, which is a production which lasted about not even 10 years, which is slightly later. It's about 1748. And the Chinese evidence, it's, in my opinion, given by the fact that it continues with Blandechine prunus blossom. And in the middle, you have this Caldino, it's a warmer, double wall with these Chinese heads. Again, a sort of elaborate technique going back to China, but at the same time, with European flowers. They were very rare, these objects. I think this one and another one in an American collection are the only two known. Now, here we come to documents which are extremely important. One thing for giving a date of the good Stampino blue and white porcelain, because the documents, as you can see, one is dated, if I'm not wrong, 1747, and the other one is a letter of 1745, in which Carlo Ginori, and at the end says, I obtained the good cobalt to do a proper blue color, because although Stampino, you know, the sort of stencil color done through small parchment prototypes, it was at the beginning rather grayish and not even, so he never considered it important. And here he writes, I ended this very important service, which I didn't attempt to do before, because I never had the right blue color. And here I show you, which I find particularly interesting, here is again our Medici porcelain plate. We have a Stampino around 1748-50 in a private collection. That was a big service because they scatter all around. And I would like to, point out these flowers, because what is actually fascinating to me in the Ginori iconography is that it's never straightforward. I mean, you look at a Stampino and you say, here, there's everything. I mean, there is obviously, and you will see it here in my next slide, there is the Medici porcelain. Obviously, there is the blue and white from Oriental collection. But there is something else, in my opinion, which is unique. And this is important to link with Vezzi, because Vezzi porcelain, which I'm not showing, but most of you know, has not only some figures, some flowers which are out from a Turkish background, but even the colors in a certain way. And this here, the verticality of the decoration to me is quite interesting, and it mingles different sort of sources. And here again, you have now what I was saying before, the first production of Ginori. What is quite important to remember is that when Ginori manufacturing started, Florence was, and for all the first period until the death of Carlo Ginori, the first 20 years of production, Florence was without a ruler. So the influences would have been, on one side, Vienna and its background, and the porcelain which was made in Vienna. On the other side, the Oriental, but who had to be remembered and who Ginori wanted actually to resemble was the precedent ruler, because either in sculpture, and you all know the Foggini, Soldani models which were repeated in porcelain, but even in painting, he tried to look at what had been done at the court, and the fact that he uses on blue and white exactly the same mark as Francesco I is an evident sign that he wants to continue the importance of what was done at the court in the imprenditorial way. And he is the one who will be the enlightened entrepreneur who will make the bridge between the Medici and the Lorena. And here again, an example of how much this court collection influenced Ginori. And you have on your left-hand side a blue and white teak ware in the collection of the Electress Palatine. On your right hand, a Ginori example in the so-called Fiori Blue, and which is not Stampino, because in Stampino they would refer as Stampa in the early inventories, and Fiori Blue is this after extreme Oriental, I would say Chinese exemplars. You can see the shape is local, is European, Italian, but the decoration is straightforward with chrysanthemums and lotus flower from the Chinese prototype. And now going a little bit on the, or even so to go into color, obviously color, I mean, he wanted to produce blue and white, but then around the half of the 18th century, and the colored polychrome enamel decoration was the first aim of the manufacturer, and these were especially improved by a series of painters like Carl Wendelin Anreiter, his son Anton, and Giuseppe Romain, and many others who are listed in the big literature done by Ginori himself, Leonardo Ginori Lisci, Alessandro Biancalana, and many others. And here I just wanted to make sort of a sequence just for fun, let's say, but not only you have this very beautiful water jug, I would say, mounted, done in Canchi Famille Verte porcelain and mounted presumably in Holland, dated at the end of the 17th century. Then you have the very beautiful example of the so-called Stoppani coffee service, dated 1753 in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And I show it on the other side, without the marks. And this, you can see the model is after Genoese silverware, more or less contemporary. And I just had fun to show you the three influences. I mean, one is the decoration on the pot. The other one is taken from this Canchi original, and at the center is a Dupaquier porcelain flower. So obviously, Ginori mixed them up, in my opinion. On one side, looking at prints, but on the other side, in the decoration and in the way it's parted, in my opinion, he still had in his mind an example of the Chinese originals. Now, this is even easier because you have a beautiful tureen around 1755, I would say, kept also this one in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it's one of the nicest examples of the so-called Servizio al Tulipano, a very early example. And you can see this, the prototype is obviously, and here again we have an example of the second quarter of the 18th century, kept in the Palazzo Pitti. But you can see how Ginori reworked it, and there's a couple of things I'd like to say on this tureen. A is that it has incised marks, and on the cover there is 4, and now 3 and 4. You find them always, and on pieces which are after 1750, but before normally 1760, and most of them are also on the very good figures which were made at the end of the first period. We'll see some. And second is the palette. It's this very bright red, emerald green, and periwinkle blue, which will not continue in the second half of the 18th century, whereas this sort of decoration has always been brought on until, although very styled and with a rather dark red, in the early 19th century. Now we go to the last part of the talk. I hope I still have some time. And bringing in evidence, bringing in evidence what was the influence, how can I say, the influence of Turquerie, which was naturally in Florence in the Lorenese period for different reasons. One of the most easy ones is that Florence was under Austria. Austria had won the very important battle in 1687, if I'm not wrong, against Turkey. Turkey was, and the Ottoman Empire, which always fascinated Europe since, I would say, 15th century at least, if not even before, but was interpreted exactly as China, as you all know, had been interpreted by the chinoiserie taste. Now, this are 2 portraits by Francis Stephan and Maria Theresia, painted, in my opinion, although they're not signed, the right one of Maria Theresia very much remembers the Martin van Muytens in Schönbrunn, and she is wearing, as well as he, a costume, a Turkish costume, and had a mask in her hand. So probably these costumes, which was, I think, quite usual, they were part, and they are also, I mean, in Florence, record that they were used for masquerade. And the interest in the Orient, in Turkey, was registered, obviously, in the Ginori manufacture, but in a very interesting way, because I think also to this look backwards to the Medician tradition and to the best also interpretation of the Middle East, which had been done, for instance, by Jacopo Ligozzi, a Veronese painter, who had worked for the Medici and had been producing in 1587, I think, this beautiful series of 22 temperas on Turkish costumes interpreted in a very interesting way. And what is quite stunning is the fact that they were copied in Doccia. Probably the painting is, although we haven't found the document, we have found a document in 1757 where it says copiati tempere della libreria Gaddi di Firenze, which was a very important, let's say, more than a bookshop, a librarian who had these manuscripts, which now are in the Uffizi. There were 22, 2 round and 20 oval plates, and on these as well, you can find those incised marks, especially like on the plate of the service with the peonies, with the tulips, 2 to 1. And so these are quite interesting for the date, the end of the first period, and Reiter had gone away. So this is really a big question, whether they were still painted in the time of Karl Wendelin and Reiter, who leaves the factory in 1747, or probably by Romei, who was still there after him. It's the style and the way they are done. We had always thought about Reiter. Now these marks are a bit of a question, and also the fact they are listed, all of them, in 1757 inventories. Now, this is great fun. We found this document of 1747 or 49, no, 1747, of an order of porcelain and other objects for Constantinople. Now, it lists a series of objects, but among them a lot also of pietratura, trays, and from the descriptions, which you probably can see now better than me, it's described a tray with pietratura inlays and handles in silver. And this one we have now at the Hofmobilien Depot was actually a gift from the court to Francis Stephan. So it's not the same one, but I think the taste and the way they were done was absolutely the same one. And also, you know, Ginori himself had a manufactory of pietratura, which has been highly studied by Alvar González Palacios. And now this is the most funny part, not funny, I mean interesting part. These are in documents in the Ginori archives. And what is so interesting that I haven't shown it here, but I found a letter dated 1748 in which someone who was in charge for the Middle East commerce says, look, you sent us a lot of ceramics, and in fact, Ginori, in the documents, which then will be published, sends different cases of porcelain, most of it being painted in white and blue or in plain white. Because actually, and also the other interesting part is that they were all paid in piastre. Now, since 1753, this is also a termine antiquem, very interesting, because after 1753, the money, the official money for the Middle East was the thaler, the famous Maria Theresia thaler, which was used until the end in the 19th century, I think, until the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And all of these were paid in piastres, so definitely before 1750. Second part, the letter says, look, you sent us very nice stuff, but we want to, it's not exactly what we need, and we send you models that you have to copy. And in the document, it says, which has been kindly translated to me by William Kwiatkowski, in the center, I try to go a bit at the victorious by the favor given the Lord of the worlds, the possessor of happiness, and the name is Muhammad Pasha, 1158, which is 1745-1746, and then Muhammad Pasha Karamanli. And the Karamanlis were a Turkish family who ruled Tripoli in North Africa under the authority of the Ottoman Empire until 1835. And now, just to go really quickly, and because I'm afraid I ran out of time, the end of the taste in Turchery in Florence, you can still see with this beautiful painting by Zocchi, which is an example for a table made for the which was sent to Francesco Stefano, which was sent to Vienna, and last is the making by Gaspero Bruschi, head of the sculptors, of a series of Oriental. This one I like to show you, and I thank Paolo Lucas for pointing my attention to this statue, which is totally different to the very important series. And here you have the last part of the Ferriol, but the well-known ones are these Orientals, which are taken by the Recueil of the Saint-Estampe du Levant by Count de Ferriol, who was ambassador in Constantinople, and which was actually its first print of 1714 was black and white, and which is still conserved today in the Doccia manufactory. The candlesticks are around 1760, and with that I am also over the date and over the time, so I would like to conclude and to thank you very much and invite you in November to the exhibition in Florence. Thank you very much.